second. India have won the Test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to 81 All Out. This is Mahesh, your host for today's show. As we always do, as is customary for our podcast, ahead of a big series, we try and look back at a series from the past played by the same teams. So ahead of England visiting India in January on the first test starting on Jan 25th, we thought we'll use this as an opportunity to go back and revisit an interesting series from the past. This was England's tour of India in 2001. I mean, we were toggling between two choices. One is to go back then to the 93 series, which has kind of got some extra love these days on the back of Sky's coverage of that series. You know, they did a special on that series, which was quite insightful and hilarious as well. So we thought that'll probably be a little bit overdone. So we thought we'll revisit 2001, which is an interesting series from many perspectives. It's not too far back in time, but it's far enough for us to look at it as history, look at it as things that we kind of vaguely remember in sort of highlights package, but not too much in detail. So to talk about that series, I've got my fellow host, Sidvi, Ashoka, and 81 All Out regular Prashant also joining us. Hey, Prashant, welcome back.
Hey, hi Mahesh. Great to be here.
As always, we'll start with the first question. Just a little bit of context about what you're doing in life at that time and how did you follow the series and what are your recollections of the series now when you look back at it?
Yeah, so I remember during the series, I was part of the university cricket team, and we were playing an inter-university tournament, which was in Guntur and Vijayawada. Like all the games were there, and I remember especially during the first test and maybe one day of the second test, we were there, in Guntur in our room, and if we had a match or something at the end of the day, we'd come back and watch the highlights, or if it was a day of practice or something, we would practice in the morning and then spend the rest of the day in front of one small TV, and we were watching it there. And then, of course, the ODIs, I was back in Chennai, so that's what I was doing then.
I was I was in college at that time in 2001, and second year, maybe third year, and 2001 was interesting because for pretty much all of 2000, I had sort of not watched much cricket because that whole match fixing scandal, end of 99, 2000, it was so scarring for my 18, 19-year-old self that I felt that this is like a hopeless sport. And, back then you're like, also wondering in a bit of a confused state in your life, wondering what you were doing. It became pretty clear to me that, I was not... unlike many of my classmates, I was not really passionate about engineering that I was doing then. So I was in a bit of a confused state. And in that confused state, I said, okay, cricket is like this hopeless sport that has cheated me all my life. I quit. So 2000, I didn't watch much cricket at all. So 2001 is when, after that Australia series, the epic series, which Lakshman and Harbhajan and all, that sort of was the revival for me. And then after that, India went to... Of course, they went to Zimbabwe, I think immediately after that. They went to South Africa later for that really fractious series with where Mike Dennis episode happened, which was actually just before the series. So it was quite exciting to get back to cricket in a way after a bit of a break. So yeah, I don't I do remember that this series happened not too long after 9/11, right? And everybody, in September, when that happened in 2001, it became like such a major point of conversation in my circles in college. So for nearly 1-2 months after that, every day we were like almost ball by ball tracking what was happening in the sort of the geopolitical space. And that was a huge conversation around then. But yeah, so this series came up around after that, and I remember we're still talking about 9/11, but also occasionally saying, "Oh yeah, yesterday this happened" and all that. So it was quite my memories of this talking about this series interspersed with whatever was happening in the world at that time. Yeah. Also, there was a test in Bangalore, the third test, which I did attend for. I attended. think 3 days of that test actually. So yeah, that was quite a vivid memory.
Interesting. I was reading while I was just looking at the reports. So Caddick didn't come for the series on grounds of security issues or whatever. Was that on the back of the 9/11? I didn't connect the dots earlier. Now that you
Yeah. There were thoughts about. I mean, of course, the cricketing world was still different back then, right? I mean, it's not like BCCI was still just a growing into a superpower. Hadn't yet become in a state where they were, the kings. So yeah, so the England, even though technically speaking, India had nothing to do with 9/11, there was concern that the subcontinent could pose to be a security challenge and all that, and there were talks about that. And the Caddick didn't come, I think, partly because there was a birth of a child also. But maybe I mean, I'm guessing there was also a security concern around that. I think even Alex Stewart, there was some news around that with Alex Stewart.
No, so interestingly, in Nasser Hussain's book, he actually talks about how they had a security meeting in the light of 9/11, and he says that there were two people who had serious family concerns. I mean, or rather, their family had concerns about them traveling. One was Caddick, who didn't come for the test, and the other was Robert Croft, who didn't make the tour, who was their first choice spinner. So, and interestingly, he says that the guy, so they had this big meeting where, they had all the players and, even guys like Darren Goff, who was declared himself unavailable for the test matches. He was also part of that meeting, and he was raising all these concerns saying, if something happens, what's your plan B? How do you get us out of there? And things like that. And he said that the guy who made like the most sort of impassioned speech in that meeting was actually Mark Ramprakash, who was actually saying exactly what you were saying, Sid. He was saying that you guys are probably safer in India than you are in England. I mean, just remember 9/11 happened in America. It happened in New York. So, it's not, it didn't happen in Bombay. So you're probably safer out there. And finally the tour went ahead. But yeah, this was very much a very heated topic of discussion before the tour.
To complete the circle, Ashoka, what were you doing at the time?
Yeah, I was just saying to Prashant before we started this, I finished my 12th board exams, and nobody had told me that there was an entrance exam which would be completely different from the board exam. So I was just, and even for the board exams, there was that Lakshman knock and that Harbhajan 32 wickets. And after that, as Sidvi was saying, we went to Zimbabwe and Lakshman played some of the best 20s and 30s that you'll ever see. All that was happening. So I was like having great fun. And then England were coming and all the fun went away because England in those days was not that fun. England were this boring team, at least in India, because they didn't have spinners to threaten our batting. And they generally did not play spin that well. So England in India was like a boring series, for me at least. That was what I thought at that point in time. And I was proved right. I mean, this is a boring series. There were 2 draws. And to compound all that misery, there is that Trescothick guy, man. I mean, he's a great batsman and all that, but why should he always score against India? Such a pain that guy is. And that guy was at his peak form in this period of time. So all that combined to make this, I wanted to watch this series with like great enthusiasm, but as usual, the England of the late 90s and the early 2000s happened, and it was so boring that I was complaining to you guys that I might not remember most of what has happened here also. It's so bad. I mean, the one thing that I even remember is Craig White's 100, and that's not even worth remembering. I don't think even Craig White, and I mean, he would be like, yeah, maybe I scored a test 100 somewhere.
No, I was thinking about Trescothick actually, and my reaction to Trescothick used to be similar to yours. I used to get quite irritated with him, not because he was a bad batter, because he was a very good batter. And I also didn't really find him aesthetically pleasing to watch. I mean, he was very effective, but He was, but then in hindsight, next came Alistair Cook, and then Trescothick looks like David Gower. Like what?
Yeah.
No, but
Now,
there's also the duplicity, no? So Trescothick doesn't have a big forward stride or anything, doesn't move his feet much. No one seems to have a problem. Sadagopan Ramesh plays the same way, and suddenly Jeffrey Boycott is saying, his footwork is rubbish, and this and that and the other. No?
nobody likes a Tamil Nadu player.
Yeah.
In this world, in Tamil Nadu, if you pick cricket, you are not going to represent your country for long, or you will be dropped at the first possible instance, citing conditions.
But there is no Indian batter who evokes as vivid memories as Sadagopan Ramesh does in that first in that debut test against Akram. Okay, so whatever you say, you cannot take away people's memory, whatever they are against whoever they are.
What is the point? I don't want memory. I want like a record. He should have played more tests. Let's come back to the series because we got a lot to talk about this series. It came at actually an interesting juncture in the respective cult creation of Nasser Hussain's captaincy and Ganguly's captaincy, and both, the full narrative arc had not formed yet, but both had a similar sort of narrative arc. When Nasser Hussain took over the captaincy, England had just hit the rock bottom, right? I think they were the number 9th ranked test team or something a couple of years back or a year back or something. Then, the central contracts and all that. And then he goes to Pakistan, wins, and he goes to Sri Lanka and wins. And of course, they lost the Ashes and like an absolute drubbing at that. And Ganguly, match fixing and win against Australia. Maybe they won in Zimbabwe. They lost in Sri Lanka before coming here. But of course, the South Africa series before that, which was quite controversial and colorful for a variety of reasons. Let's come to that a little bit later.
No, they didn't win in Zimbabwe. They
won a test in Zimbabwe. Lost a test in Zimbabwe. Yeah, it was a drawn series. Yeah, correct. But even a test win in Zimbabwe at that time meant something, which is the pleasures of being a mid-table team, right? I was looking at both England's sort of forming coming into the series and India's prior series coming into this. They were such exciting contests because there was always an inefficiency, right? Even when Nehra and Srinath are bowling well in Zimbabwe, because they didn't have the backup bowlers, they let it go. Like the lack of excellence, the lack of sustained excellence in so many different teams provided for such fascinating contests.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when India, West Indies, and India, Sri Lanka were like great contests to watch. Now, after like in the last 15 years, this Indian team has just basically destroyed that notion of exciting contest. They go and they just blank those teams. But there was a time when we used to really look forward to, the closeness of the contest in those countries.
And not just Indian team, even England. England went and won in Pakistan recently. It was not fun. When Nasser Hussain's team went and won, they had to like scrape a win through like in the dark hours
of dark.
Yeah, barely managing to win. I mean, England also won in Sri Lanka recently, like 3-love, but it doesn't have the same sort of, like fun and contest that you got because of the inefficiencies in the team. Now, I mean, the world is getting more efficient, but it's also robbing us of such exciting contests.
No, but I think this England-Pakistan was exciting. I mean, they with their aggressive
batting. The baseball, yeah, true.
Yeah, that was good. And in fact, they won a test and like really like close to the end, right? I mean, I think it was the Lahore test or something where they just pulled it off thanks to, with Ollie Robinson and all that. So it was good. It was good. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so just to focus on the cult creation of this, like was that in place? Like, was there a lot of talk about? I vaguely remember Nasser Hussain for sure. Was a Ganguly cult like work in progress at that time, or it became a thing later on?
Ganguly, that cult started pretty much in that 2001, right? I mean, with that coming late to the toss, and I mean,
no, but a lot of the romanticization of that happened later. I remember, like for instance, in 2001 itself, there was quite a bit of commentary around the fact that he didn't pull his weight in that series.
Yeah. Of course. Like, I think we have discussed also before how he was actually booed in that series, right? I mean, in that Chennai test, and there were parts in which people were still feeling that he was a captain undeservedly. So Yeah, I mean, it was there. I actually feel that this series, like this particular series, and even little before that in South Africa, I feel like there were a lot more people who were like questioning him and talking about both his batting as well as his captaincy. I feel like the cult, like it grew in the like it was there, during the Australia series because India won, but then gradually with Zimbabwe being a draw and then South Africa, India losing. I mean, of course, losing that series and coming here, it felt a bit like his sheen was wearing actually. I mean, I think it maybe got back again after that famous NatWest and shirt waving and all that. But I think at this point of time, if you look at the media reports and everything, he was being questioned rather than being hailed.
I actually think that Nasser Hussain is like a very, he doesn't get enough credit, when people talk about great captains and stuff like that, because there is a tendency to measure captains by the results that their team produces. That's more often than not a function of how good the team itself was. If you look at how India lined up in this series and how England lined up in this series, the fact that India won only one test and England actually took a first innings lead in the next two is pretty amazing when you look at how thin Nasser Hussain's resources were. And bear in mind that Nasser Hussain actually, Atherton had better attacks at various points in his captaincy. Atherton commanded better attacks. And after Nasser Hussain, even Vaughan and later on Strauss, they had far better attacks. But I think the amazing thing about Nasser Hussain was that he managed to get the results that he did with the resources that he had. And you can maybe put him in the same league of maybe Stephen Fleming or to a lesser extent Arjuna Ranatunga also, where that's where, the tactics of captaincy are actually tested more. And I think Ian Chappell has spoken about this, where he saw Ranatunga leading Sri Lanka in Australia and they were getting thrashed. But he was like, somehow Arjuna always kept them in the game for longer than they deserved to be. And that was very much the case with Nasser Hussain. So even here, he was without Gough, he was without Caddick, he was without Croft. He had basically Hoggard and he had Flintoff. And this was like early Flintoff, right? So I mean, Flintoff is like a bowler of two halves in a sense. I mean, a cricketer with a two-half career. In the first 5.5 years of his Test career, he's averaging less than 20 with the bat and almost 50 with the ball. In the second half, he's averaging 36 with the bat and 30 with the ball. I mean, he's legit the best all-rounder in the world. Nasser Hussain had him in the first half. So he didn't have the bowler that Michael Vaughan had, in the Ashes, for example. So I have a lot of respect and a lot of sympathy for Nasser Hussain because I think, he doesn't get his due.
That's actually interesting because around this point, actually Nasser Hussain as a captain was getting a lot of appreciation, and like even Marco, for instance, said like the classic Aussie way of appreciating. Oh, he's a bit of an Aussie. I said that's a compliment. But in general, like he was getting quite a lot of praise for his captaincy around that time. I mean, even like Sachin rated his 100 at Ahmedabad pretty highly because of the way he was made to score runs by Nasser Hussain's captaincy, for instance. So the trajectory of Ganguly's captaincy myth making versus Hussein's kind of took a slightly different turn as time passed by, right? Like now you feel like Nasser doesn't get enough of a credit, whereas Ganguly seems to be getting a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think the Ganguly, a lot of it has got to do with the fact that he was the captain after the whole fixing thing exploded, right? I mean, had it been somebody else who was captain, like for instance Anil Kumble, who was a very, very legitimate choice to be captain at that time, had it been Kumble, I mean, I don't think India would have necessarily had majorly, vastly different results. For all you know, they might have even had better results. So then he would have been like, I think there would have been a legend around him. So I think the timing of when you're captain, eventually, like also decides how history looks back at you. Like Nasser Hussain again, it was great. It was good timing for him because there was a period when 1999, when he was still captain, remember when New Zealand went there and beat England, and it was at that point of time, as per the rankings, England were the worst team in the world. Like as per
I
the
think that was
test
Alex
rankings.
Stewart as captain. I think he kind of resigned after that series or something like that. He took over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then my mistake there. But yeah, so again, that timing was vital because England went from being the worst test team ranking wise to then going on and winning in Sri Lanka, winning in Pakistan, and then coming to India and doing like being putting in a very creditable performance. Like it's not a joke to come to India and then battle back after losing the first test pretty badly and having a chance to win the next two tests and coming very close to, in fact, winning the third one, if not for bad weather. So yeah, I think makes a difference. I mean, who knows? Had it been, I mean, whoever else they could have appointed as captain, I don't know, whichever candidate, maybe he would have been like his aura would have shown through as well. But I remember Nasser Hussain in this particular series, especially like you spoke about uh, Ashley Giles bowling to Tendulkar in those tests, and the field that he sat, Giles bowling down leg side pretty much and cramping Sachin up. I mean, there were talks of how it was in a way Douglas Jardinian, right? I mean, Jardine did it with fast bowlers, and went for attack, but this was actually a very very defensive move. But still, he stuck with it for however much of a criticism he was copying for being a extremely defensive captain, a negative captain. That word negative. He stuck with it, and eventually, yeah, Giles ended up doing well in those throughout the series actually.
And if you think about it, it was the inverse of baseball, no? In the sense that you're essentially recognizing that your opposition has a whole array of explosive batsmen, and what they have the capacity to do is to give their bowlers time. And so you kind of inject time into the equation, whereas baseball, you're seeking to take time out of the equation. Here, you're actually injecting time into the equation. You're frustrating him. And, at that time in that series, I think Sehwag was batting 6 or 7. So he wasn't able to set the pace and get the score going the way he did later on in his career. So you had this really nice opportunity to, even if you weren't taking wickets in a bunch, you were restricting the pace at which the game flowed and you were forcing mistakes, which was brilliant captaincy.
You missed an opportunity to say the inverse of baseball is Nasball. So, anyways.
Brilliant. I think we got the headline for the board. No, I mean, I'm saying we did a memory of the 2004 India-Australia series. Last year, Prashant was also there. And there we spoke about how Australia learned from 2001 and, the lines they bowled and the fields they set were very different from 2001, right? When the 2001 Steve Waugh's team was all-out attack. But 2004, under Ponting and Gilchrist effectively, they were much more the conservative side. And this is pretty much what Hussain was doing, except Hussain didn't have McGrath and Gillespie and Vaughan. McGrath and Gillespie and Vaughan, and he was pretty much trying the same thing with Ashley Giles and Craig White and whoever, and Flintoff and all that. Yeah,
I mean, it is. You can never overstate the greatness of an attack that can be attritional and attack and take wickets at the same time. Only a handful of attacks have done that in the history of the game. Australia was lucky enough to have it. This poor guy didn't. I mean, he could only basically bottle up the scoring and frustrate, and that's what he did. I mean, frustrate India's batters. So in his book, he talks about the fact that if they had batted at 4 runs and over in that series, we would have had no chance. I had my only way of controlling the game was to restrict it to 2 and over, and if I did that, I would force an error.
Yeah, but just to kind of bring it down to size a little bit. I mean, if you look at that Ahmedabad test, India bowled first. It was also a slow wicket. I mean, even like what Kumble bowled 51 overs to get 7 wickets. Harbhajan bowled 35 overs, and the scoring rate was like 2.81. I'm sure there's a lot of credit to Nazir Hussain to recognize the limitations that they had and to maximize whatever he could do by sort of tactically playing differently. But at large, the wicket was also a slow wicket. Like, I mean, the pace of scoring in that match was also a reflection of the fact that it was not an easy wicket to score on.
There are other teams who have come and who have still not been able to restrict the Indian batting, right? So, I mean, the credit is that they tried and they somewhat.
No, they were effective. I'm not denying that. I'm just trying to bring that to size. I mean, even like to get like a team which should have otherwise scored at 3, to below 2.5, and therefore sucking time out of the test, or as Prashant beautifully put it, injecting time into the equation. I mean, there's surely that deserves a lot of credit. Just to go back on the like, I mean, before the test series, coming into the test series for India, it was an interesting time because India came off this South Africa series where they played, according to them, they played the third test, but it was not official. And Sehwag was supposed to have served a one test ban, which they believed he served in the test, in the unofficial test in which he didn't play, right? I think Connor Williams played, if I'm not wrong. And then they come into this test where Deepdas Gupta was opening the batting, and he got 100, and he also came on the back of a lot of criticism about his wicket keeping. Right, I remember Navjot Singh Sidhu going after him quite a bit for his let's say sloppy misses in that series. So it was not like India came into this test expecting to roll over England pretty easily, because they came on the back of a lot of question mark over their recent performances as well. They lost in Sri Lanka.
I mean, if you read John Wright's book, and he was the coach during this whole period, it seems crazy that 2001 he had this amazing series against Australia, and you think, chalo, he's set for the rest of his tenure. But he writes about the fact, exactly what you were saying, Mahesh, the fact that results weren't going his way, and he was getting all these murmurs and murmurings that the knives were being sharpened for him, and that he was having these uncomfortable phone calls from Jagmohan Dalmia and all that. All of that was happening exactly for all the reasons that you are talking about, and it was happening just as India was entering this series. So it was a pretty uncertain time for John Wright also.
Also, let's take a moment to sort of elaborate and pay our respects to Connor Williams. Okay, poor guy. The only test he plays is a test that is deemed unofficial, and he doesn't play a single test after that. He scores like 5 and 42 against a pretty good attack. I mean, you're talking Pollock, Hayward, Nitini, Chalice, Klusner. I mean, I'm looking at the scoreboard. And to do that in those conditions is quite creditable. Poor guy never got a test, man, after that. I mean,
I think Rob Linda has the video of
that test?
40, of that 40. Connor Williams is 40. He looks quite sorted, man.
Yeah, and then the next test he doesn't play because it's the Das and they decide to open with Das and Das Gupta. So I'm just looking at that test. Who did he open with? He opened with Das. So yeah. Like Ganguly and his how many openers he has? He messed up. Like this is the beginning of his messing up of openers.
I remember till 2003, Shivsundar Das was considered as like the technical master of opening.
The poor man's
budget Gavaskar. Yeah.
Budget.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good batsman, to be honest. I mean, he played well in that Zimbabwe test which we won. He played well as well.
Yeah, also in that New Zealand series, he was very good. Where everyone got out for single digit or double digit, he looked like at least he had a clue what was going on.
I mean, even in the 2001 series, he played well against Australia. He played.
Yeah, he batted well in that series. Yeah. Anyway, I thought I should give Connor Williams 2 minutes of time.
Honorable mention, of course. I feel extremely sorry for him. So after the Mohali test, I thought it was going to be like a cakewalk, right? Like, and England lost comfortably, and India played like pretty well, and you feel like India is back to its winning ways at home and so on. And that is where whatever we discussed about the way England recovered from there, and also Also, one more thing. I'm not sure who mentioned this. Maybe Prashant, you mentioned this in another podcast as well. That on the back of that South Africa series, the selectors decided to drop the whole bowling attack or something, right? The fast bowling attack. Was that why Iqbal Siddiqui played?
No, they didn't drop. Srinath was injured. So
Srinath was injured. What about the rest?
Srinath was injured, and so I guess they played Tino Johanan in his place.
Yeah.
Siddiqui and Bangar are interesting. I think maybe because Sehwag was dropped, they decided to bring in one of them, but I'm not sure how both made it. So see, I'm looking at that unofficial test scorecard, and the India's bowling attack was Srinath, Nehra, Prasad, Harbhajan, Kumble, and of course Tendulkar, who would bowl once in a while. So basically, they dropped Nehra and Prasad as far as I can see, unless there was an injury there. But Srinath was injured. Yeah.
And he came back to play the second test.
He came back, and then Sehwag was not allowed to play that test. So then they needed somebody in place, which was weirdly Siddiqui or Bangar, whoever.
No, it was Bangar. So the formula then was 4 bowlers plus a batter who bowls a little. So if you see, Sehwag bowled regularly in this series. Bangar also bowled in that Mohali test. So that was that was the funda then. Opener is X. We will keep rotating opener, and we'll have 4 bowlers, out of which 2 are Kumble and Harbhajan, and we'll have one kind of one guy who can bat at 6 or 7 and bowl a few overs.
Yeah. Also, remember before the test, there was quite a bit of chatter about Johanan and how he was really pacey and speedy and all that. And of course, back then, anybody who was even remotely quick, like 130s and all, was like people used to get highly excited, right? I mean, we would never like when somebody said he's really quick and all, the thought was, oh, okay, it's probably 130, 135. We would never think he'll be 140.
Man. He was tall also.
No.
But then, he was tall. But then you saw him in the test, right? And then like the sort of the bubble was like immediately punctured.
He was tall and slow, like Venkatesh Prasad.
No, so there is this term, okay, there's a very Hindu newspaper term. They used to call them speedsters. Okay, it would give you like a lot of it would give you a lot of hope before you actually watch them bowl, and then you realize that it's not that much. I mean, they're not that fast. But there's a very, very typical Hindu term.
And the other thing about the Hindu newspaper was that whenever somebody was making a debut, right? Like they would have a preview and then they would have a little bar about that person making their debut. Like if it was Johanan so like in this case, I think 3 people were making their debut, right? Both Bangar and Siddiqui were also on debut. So it was like they put that sidebar with all 3 of them. And little one paragraph each on each one, and probably used speedster for Johanan.
Yeah. You know what I'm chuckling at? I'm chuckling at this bowling lineup, man. Like I'm just remembering all the early 2000s. We just were playing on vibes. That's all. It was just whatever. Like the batting order is set. We need 5 people who are available. Okay, Nikhil Chopra come in. Nilesh Kulkarni come in. Venkatapati Raju, okay, come in. You have done it.
Ashish
Kapoor. Some we have. We have like Harbhajan and Kumble were set. After that, it was just 3 people, whoever. You come in or get out. That's all.
And also, I was just reviewing, looking at some of the reports from back then. And it's interesting how, now, if that series had happened now, the primary theme would be death of Test cricket, right? I mean, how the game is dying and still they are preparing such pitches and still they are such boring draws. I mean, first of all, imagine a series with 3 Test series with 2 draws. When is the last time? I mean, it's been a while since that itself has happened in India, right? In India, usually you have you have outright victories. And then but back then, I think, because of course there was no T20 back then. And also for some reason, I mean, they were saying it was drab and it was boring, but this death of Test cricket hadn't yet crept in back then.
It's still 2001, no? It's not back then, like 1980s back then. It's just 2001. It's still younger. It's okay.
I mean, it was also the era of like flat wickets and big scores and whatever, right? If you are celebrating big scores and batsmen are averaging over 50 and batsmen having this great appetite, you can't simultaneously complain about draws. I mean,
No, so I'll tell you what I find really interesting. Okay, is that Tendulkar in 2001 was probably like at absolute peak. Like this love child of Gavaskar and Viv Richards, where like he literally scored 300 runs at an average of 75, and Nasser Hussain counts that as a win. The interesting thing was that the tactics used against Tendulkar to keep him quiet or to keep him less destructive was to get Ashley Giles to bowl left arm spin to him at one end and to get Andrew Flintoff to bowl bouncers at him at the other. That was the approach. You cut to 20 years later and you have the best batsman in the world, Steve Smith. And what's the theory? How do you keep Steve Smith quiet? You bowl short and you bowl left arm spin. So there's like a lovely complete circle symmetry to that whole thing.
So I mean, earlier, like there used to be like the way Tendulkar used to play spin. I mean, even if it was flattish spin, was very different from what it was now. Now it was like much more the paddling, sort of gliding. Sachin, of course, he was still very, very, very good. No taking away from that. But his sort of he removed that charging down the pitch for a long time.
And I don't know whether if it was that tennis elbow thing or what, or this negative line, that almost straight paddle, down the leg. He started bringing that. He started developing that shot, and he started using that shot a lot more. I mean, towards the end of his career, I wonder if that was a response to this kind of.
It might have also been a back thing, right? Because that Pakistan test, his back basically was beaten up.
no, Sachin also came off a heel injury around this time, right? Before the South Africa series. I think in the South Africa series, we also played a one-day series or a one-day tournament, right? With Kenya in there. And Sachin was just coming back of a heel injury. He was quite scratchy in the ODI series, to be honest. And then he played like a dream in Bloemfontein in the test. So he was coming back, I mean, from a back injury before that and a heel injury around that and so on. And I found it amusing when Ashoka said Sachin started using this paddle shot a lot more in the later part of his career. And he played a lot of that in the 2001 Australia series. And from his debut to 2001 is a shorter period than 2001 to his end of his career, right? Like, so with Sachin, our idea of the timeline goes for a toss. What we consider as later and what we consider as earlier. It's such a vast career. but I mean, to have a 24-year career is just crazy. I mean, to go through all that. Anyway, that's a topic for another day. Sidhu, you said you were in Bangalore. And again, both Ahmedabad and Bangalore, I feel like, people remember some episodes from that test distinctly. Sorry, before going to Bangalore, I want to touch upon a couple of things in the Ahmedabad test. One was Sachin dismissing Mark Ramprakash with a googly, which I believe is the best ball he's bowled in his career, with all due considerations to a lot of other balls that he bowled. And the other one was did Michael Vaughan get like handing the ball out in this one or the next one?
In Bangalore.
Oh, that is in Bangalore. Okay, we will talk about it during the Bangalore test.
For me, the interesting thing about the Ahmedabad test match, and this just goes to show how how imaginative tactics can help. If you see, India were given a target of about 350 odd, and they had like 100 overs to chase it down, right? If you cut to the Chennai test in 2008, it was basically Sehwag opened. It's actually Sehwag who set up that game for India. It's probably one of the few times you can argue that a batsman has won you a test match, is that test match. So Sehwag scores 80 in 50 balls, and then Tendulkar and Yuvraj Singh just come and knock it around and India win. Now, this could have been that kind of a game. You have a similar kind of target with a similar time frame, but you choose to bat Sehwag at 6 or 7. just imagine if you had sent him up at the top, that game could have opened up really nicely. And you could have had a result either way, but, it didn't pan out that way. You had India plodded along at 2 runs and over and got nowhere.
Yeah, so it was a test where England, perhaps, I mean, in hindsight, batted a bit too long. I mean, it could have still ended in a draw with the pitch and all that. But, they were, come on, we are leading by like 350 runs and odds of team chasing that on the final day. I mean, it's pretty low, but they kept batting and the batting pretty slowly also. So, yeah, ended up leaving India 274 to chase near the scorecard, which they managed pretty fine to draw the test. But even then, for on the flip side, Nasser Hussain was banned for needlessly batting and not declaring for a while. Yeah. If you see this Ahmedabad attack, right, for instance, Ahmedabad test attack, Hogarth, Flintoff, Giles, Dawson, and Craig White. I mean, come on. I mean, Matthew Hogarth was very early in his career at this time. I mean, his test career. And Flintoff was also very, very young. Giles, yeah, we spoke about. And then Dawson and White. I mean, this is like a really, really green attack. And to come to India and to get close to winning 2 tests is huge. So, yeah, I mean, I think we should acknowledge that.
Yeah, no.
It's
No, for sure. And particularly, someone like Hogarth, who's like a very typical English kind of swing bowler, to come here and actually adapt to, these kind of conditions. And he actually, if you remember, there were times when he was actually reversing the SG ball, which is
Yes.
which is a big thing. It's, the workload that he shouldered and the control that he gave Nasser Hussain in the absence of, any giant bowler in the side, was quite amazing, actually. Hogarth had an amazing series.
Also, you have to look that against our attack. No, we had what? Tenu Yohanan, Sarandeep Singh, Iqbal Siddiqui, Harbhajan and Kumble were the only 2 options that we had, man. Which was any hope.
No, but I mean, Harbhajan, Kumble, they also had Kumble. They also had Srinath for 2 tests, and I think he bowled quite penetratingly in Bangalore.
But he was coming off an injury.
Correct.
He's always either coming off an injury or getting injured by bowling 40 overs. That is his entire career.
So in the Ahmedabad test, like for instance, I don't have much memory of pretty much everything else except the highlights, right? That Sachin and White bowling to him with the tight field and Giles bowling from over the wicket on the leg side and so on. I was just looking at the scorecard and looking at the strike rate of the rest of the batsmen. So Sachin scored 100 at like 52 strike rate. Lakshman scored 75 at 39 strike rate. And SS Das scored 41 and 43. I mean, the overall run rate for the innings was 2.41 for India. Only Sehwag managed like a 58 strike rate for like 20 runs. So, I mean, sure, Sachin gets disproportionate headlines, but basically they had the chokehold on the whole Indian lineup. I mean, it's not just one batsman that they had a tactic against. They tried the same, tactic of bowling try for the whole lineup, and that worked.
Actually, this was also very much Andrew Strauss's playbook. When he had another very, very successful run where they won in Australia, they won in England, and a couple of years after Strauss Cook came to India, they won here also. Around that time also, the mantra was very much that, bowl dry, but they had the caliber of bowlers who could bowl dry and pose a wicket-taking threat at the same time. So they were maybe more successful. But yeah, very much the case where nobody looked fluent actually from India.
Okay, finally, let's move on to the Bangalore test. Sibi, how was your experience at the Bangalore test, and then what did you make of the contest?
So I remember this being quite an uncharacteristic Bangalore test because, it was seamer friendly for almost throughout, and the weather conditions were overcast. There was always the threat of rain hovering around, and yeah, I mean, Srinath bowled very well. Matthew Hoggard and Flintoff had like some dream spells. I mean, Hoggard, probably that was one of his best spells in his career. And I'm talking about a career that had quite a few really good swing bowling and seam bowling spells. I mean, he was more a swing bowler, I think, Hoggard. But yeah, it was amazing to watch, and it was quite weird actually because I mean, India were picked a side that was pretty much going with the thought that it would be like a typical, bat and then spin them out kind of wicket, but it ended up being totally different. And in fact, I remember that Hogarth spell. It came like it was weirdly, it was almost like you're watching a test match abroad. Like that was how much the ball was moving around that day. And I also remember the Sehwag innings, like of all the Indian batters who were getting, cramped and suffocated with that Giles leg side thing, and also with Flintoff bowling uh, negative-ish line. Then Hogarth suddenly coming and swinging. Then Sehwag, like I mean, he made like a 50 pretty rapidly, and he was like it was like early days of Sehwag, right? He had just come in for the South Africa series, so it was like suddenly you had this batter batting at 6 and 7, coming and taking on the attack. It felt a bit like we had found India had found their Gilchrist, who could come in later and take on the bowling and aggressively uh, make that 50, quick 50 and quick 100. Of course, eventually he would end up opening, unlike Gilchrist, who continued to bat at 7. But yeah, those were my memories of that thing. I think I don't even remember which of the days I went, but maybe the first 3 days, for all you know, maybe like part of the first 3 days. You know the way it is, because sometimes I would go like later, like for the second and third session, and though I would end up missing the first session. So I probably went for part of all three of the first 3 days. Yeah.
Nasser Hussain basically says that pitch is the most un-Indian pitch of the series, in the sense that it was really fast and rock hard. Except that if there was a rough, because the surface was fundamentally hard, and if there was a rough on either side, that's where the ball could grip, and otherwise it's like bowling on concrete. If the ball swings in the air, great, but if which is why we decided to not attack Tendulkar stumps, because if you're going to attack Tendulkar stumps, you're basically bowling on that hard, fast surface which he loves, where the ball will come onto the bat and all that. So that's why he said even more than Ahmedabad, in this test, the instructions to Giles was very, very clear that he had to try and bowl on that rough, and if it hits the rough, it'll do something. But there's an interesting thing that I read a couple of weeks back. I don't know how far it's true. I mean, like a lot of Virender Sehwag stories, the story is great, but I don't know if it is true. He says that he was batting with Tendulkar, and Tendulkar was batting in the 90s. And he's telling Tendulkar, what, there's no turn on this at all. It's like this really hard surface. It's not like a typical crumbly Indian pitch. And Giles is bowling, he's not really turning it. So, lagao, go for it. And Tendulkar's like, no, I'll wait and watch. And he keeps getting in his ear, every over when they're crossing over, saying, it's not turning, go for it. And so the poor guy finally goes for it. And that particular ball, if you look at the replay, it actually turns. I mean, it turns quite a bit. It probably hits some rough part of the pitch and spins, and Tendulkar stumped for the first time in his career. It's actually a hilarious story, if it is true.
In fact, I don't know if it was Manjrekar on commentary or something, like, when Sachin got out. First of all, like a batsman getting stumped for the first time, it's not like batsman gets stumped like every other dismissal. So I know it's odd, but it's not that odd. I'm sure there must be many other batsmen who didn't get stumped that many times, or perhaps only once. I don't know why it generated so much headlines. And not just Manjrekar, quite a lot of people said, okay, could Sachin not have tried something else, especially if you're trying to sort of enforce a result in a test match, and then Sehwag comes and shows how it is done, right? So there was quite a bit of criticism for Sachin, I thought at least, that he didn't try to hit his way out of that sort of bowling tactic against Giles and Hussain, of course.
Interesting that Manjrekar, you said Manjrekar said it, right? Because a few years earlier, there was this Ranji Trophy final, the first day-night Ranji Trophy final between Mumbai and Delhi. And Manjrekar was the captain at that time. And that was like on a really, really flat pitch. And
White
Mumbai
ball,
had made
no? They played a white ball Ranji final.
White ball Ranji final. And Mumbai had made like a massive score. And because, the pitch was flat and Delhi were also making a fist of it. And in that match, Manjrekar was captain and he instructed Nilesh Kulkarni, again a left-arm spinner, to bowl over the wicket into basically on the leg side, negatively, to restrict the runs and cramp the Delhi batters. And Manjrekar had got criticism for that. And the Delhi captain, the Delhi players had said that, this is, this was totally negative and they didn't sort of, pretty much saying that didn't live up to the spirit of the game, as though they might not have used that phrase. So interesting that Manjrekar wanted Tendulkar to hit himself out of this, negative Ashley Giles line. Also, I think as Prashant said, right, Tendulkar was at such a peak at that time that the standards for him were like unbearably high. Man. It was, and as usual, no, obviously Indians didn't rate Ashley Giles, right? Indians generally don't rate many of the spinners who come from abroad, however good they are. In fact, for a long time, Indians didn't even rate Nathan Lyon, even though he was probably one of the world's best bowlers who has bowled well there. People would be like, hey, look at Pujara struggling against Nathan Lyon. What a hopeless batter. And all. Come on, man. Nathan Lyon is a really good bowler. So, of course, they wouldn't have rated Ashley Giles. And of course, the Mumbai royalty that is Sachin, if he is struggling against this bowler, so-called mediocre bowler, so the bar was so unbearably high that it became like, that it was a failure. When, as you saw, he averaged 75. What else do you do?
No, not just 75. If you look at the top run scorers for the series, there's Sachin, and then there is like 5 Englishmen, and then Dasgupta, and then Ram Prakash. Like there's no Indian batsman in sight. Like the next best batsman after Sachin is Dasgupta, who scored 177. 100 of that came in one innings in Mohali. Then SS
the next best batter was probably Sehwag, even though he might not have had the runs for it. Yeah.
He just played 2 tests, and one of them he scored 66, but total 86. So it's like Ganguly played 3 tests for 68 runs. So it is not, it's amazing that in that series, the one batsman that you could nitpick on was Sachin. And it got, I feel like sometimes, okay, you strip away all the stories around the series. You have a series which was one love, in which 2 tests ended in a draw. Ahmedabad was a slow wicket without being able to do much, even with a reasonably decent bowling attack. And then Bangalore sort of rain affected and so on, right? It wouldn't have been a series that you talk about for a long time. But this one, just because of Nasser Hussain's tactics and Sachin's response and Sachin's reaction on getting the 100 in Ahmedabad and getting out-stumped for the first time, and Sehwag coming and kind of showing how it is done. All these stories pack so much more drama into a series which was otherwise pretty dull, I would think.
Yeah, they were. The fact that we are talking about it after like 22, 23 years, right? And still, like, we are still able to like draw quite a bit of memories from it. So it's not like we are saying we are like moaning about it. We are still like there were exciting passages. There were a lot of things about it. So yeah, I think there is something to be said about also cricket at that time, when I feel like if you take any series in 2001, right? Like you have the epic India-Australia series. But then even if you were to do a rewind of the South Africa series that India went to, there's plenty to talk about. I mean, of course, India lost that series quite comprehensively, but there's so much to talk about. Simply because I feel like the discourse around Test series at that time was a little bit more relaxed, and also things were not as rapid as they are now. I mean, now things start finish and then people move on so quickly. I think there's a little bit more gap, little bit more build up, little bit more like introspection afterwards. That was there. Maybe that's one reason why it's still remaining pretty sharp in the memory.
Forget people. Tests get over like in the second session of day one, man.
That's true. That's true. But come on, I mean, many years later, we can still do a rewind of this India South Africa series that just happened and that test that finished in 1.5 days. And still, I'm sure there'll be stuff to talk about, right? So, but maybe not enough of the build up and the post series, but still, it would be there.
No, Siddhi, you mentioned at the beginning of on the Bangalore test that it was a very different wicket. It was a seamer friendly wicket. And look at the bowling lineup he went with: Javakar Srinath, who's partnering him with the new ball, Sourav Ganguly.
Ganguly, of course. Yeah, that is, they completely misread the whole situation, and they picked Sarandeep Singh for that test. I might even remember it was his debut. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he played against Zimbabwe or something before. I'm forgetting. But yeah, they picked Kumble, Harbhajan, and Sarandeep for that wicket. Now the Bangalore is interesting. See, because I had gone for the Bangalore test in '98 against Australia. That famous test where Sachin gets 100, and then Harbhajan's debut, and Kasparov bowls really well. He gets reverse swing in the second innings, and he basically bowls India out. And Mark Taylor then goes on to helps Australia win that test with a century. So '98, Australia beat India. Of course, it was a dead rubber. They had lost the series, but still a big victory for them. In 2000, that series, which is now we know is pretty dubious, South Africa win in Bangalore. And they win in Bangalore actually, again, not in a kind of conditions that England got, but in very sort of dryish conditions where Pollock and Donald bowled really well. Like they were like, there was a mastery of control and seam in that match. And then Nicky Boye gets wickets in the second innings, and then South Africa win. Then in this test, England have the upper hand. And then in 2004, India again lose to Australia. So, in fact, if you look at Bangalore between '98 and 2010, when they finally win a match against Australia in that series, 2010 might have even been Pujara's debut, in Pujara's debut test. They don't win a test in Bangalore. They play quite like they lose to Pakistan. They lose twice to Australia. They lose to South Africa. It took a long while for like there was a break when India didn't win in Bangalore. And of course, after 2010, they pretty much won everything. Like they won in almost every test venue in India. But there was a drought, and so thought I should mention that. And so but even in that drought, this England test was particularly weird because India was, because these were conditions that were like, because of the overcast conditions and because of the swinging conditions, this is very rare to see a ball swinging around like this in back then, at the kind of pitches we were seeing back then. So yeah, overall India totally misread the conditions, picked a team with three spinners, and England got perfect conditions for them. And in Matthew Hoggart had the bowler who was a prodigious swing bowler, and Flintoff too was coming up and bowling well in that test.
I mean, usually when we do such episodes, we kind of move on after the test series, but in this one, we must talk about the ODI series as well. But before that, I just want to mention this trivia. So while I was trying to figure out, England's run of fortunes before coming into the series, I was looking at their performance in Sri Lanka, and in which one of the matches, Sri Lanka gets all out for 81. So India has an 81 all out. Sri Lanka has an 81 all out. Pakistan also has an 81 all out in 2017 in West Indies.
England
I
has
don't-
an 81 all out. England
Of
has
course,
In
England has an
Ahmedabad.
81 all out. Yes. I don't know if Bangladesh has one. That'll be interesting. I don't know. Maybe we must like do a list of 81 all outs. Do an episode on all 81 all outs for different teams.
Yeah, but I don't know how many of those 81 all-outs are sort of.
As traumatic.
Yeah, exactly.
And the obvious answer is none, right? How many podcasts are named after 81 all out in other countries? Zero. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe the 36 all out, 36 for 9 comes close, right? But again, 36 for 9, after that, India won that series. So it's more like, just
Badge
like
of
What is
honor.
36
Badge of
for
honor.
9? What does this conditions apply? I mean, it's got to be all out. There has to be a finality to it.
No, unfortunately, that guy got injured, no, Shami. So he had to retire. But,
I know. Anyway, moving on to the ODI series, which talking of the cult of Ganguly and how it evolved. This was an interesting juncture on which the whole thing pivoted. That is, the seeds were sown in this ODI series, which we'll come to later. But what did you make of this ODI series? It was an exciting sort of series. It was a close contest, and England came back to score the series as well. And it was not like, I remember some of the series, like, there was a series against West Indies, for instance, where everything was over 300 and so on. It was not one of those series. So what are your memories of the ODI series, Prashant?
So for me, the exciting thing about this ODI series was that I think it may not have been the first time it happened, but it was the first time I watched Tendulkar opening with Sehwag in the series. Before this, it was largely with Ganguly, and you always had, Ganguly was the batter with a lower strike rate, so the onus was always on Tendulkar to take the risk, to take the onus. Now he was batting with someone who was probably taking more chances than him, would probably allow him to settle down and play, and it worked out really well in the series. I think out of the 6 games, I think he opened with Sehwag in 3 or 4 of them. He started off opening with Ganguly, and then I think they swapped it around. So that was one big memory, to watch Tendulkar open with someone who is not Ganguly was happening after a long time, because I think from 96 onwards they'd been opening together. So it had been 5 years since you saw Tendulkar opening with someone else. That was exciting. The other thing was, you had mentioned this earlier. Trescothick looked like unget-outable, in this series. He was batting like a dream. Like there was nothing anyone could do, and it continued. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he got 100 against India in the NatWest final also. And
yeah.
Yeah.
The entire thing, the entire series, I only remember him hitting.
Yeah. So that was those are my 2 memories, and then of course, Flintoff doing that whole thing at the end where he takes his shirt off. And
That was Wankhede, no? Mumbai.
yeah, Wankhede, yeah. Also, this is the era where India chasing successfully itself was like a big thing, literally. So there's some context. I mean, even if Flintoff thing hadn't happened, there is enough context to suggest that it warranted, literally the Indian captain taking off his clothes to celebrate when they chased 300 plus at Lords.
No, that is true. The thing is that we cannot brush that NatWest away as, just another tri-series that at that time, it's with the sort of perspective of what was happening then, and India's troubles with chasing, and also India's general position as a mid-table side, and not really, dominating the way the current team does. To pull off 320 odd in 2003 after being whatever they were when Sachin fell, is that sort of is there is a reason why we remember that. It's not just because of Ganguly waving his jersey. You're right. I think we would remember that game fondly anyway, irrespective of what Ganguly did after.
No, Ganguly thing came later. No, so anyone who watched that match will tell you they had given up. They were doing something else, and they got to hear from other people that Yuvraj and Keith were batting, and we came back. The stories around that match was more about how they caught up with Keith's innings. In fact, most people would have missed Yuvraj's innings, and they would have seen Keith sort of hitting the winning runs or whatever. That's the kind of story that I heard. So the Ganguly thing is just the cherry on top, right? But of course, it's been like when you want to write these very macro arc stories about how this is the sign of new India. Yeah, so I mean, like particularly the shirt waving thing, right? One, Flintoff was more spontaneous. He was on the field, he was bowling, and they came back to square the series. And forget everything else. You just show the two videos of Flintoff doing it and Ganguly doing it. Flintoff doing it is so much better.
What do you mean better? Can you do
It's
it
more
at the
dramatic.
Can you
It's
do
more
it?
dramatic.
Can you do it at the home of cricket? It takes
Yeah,
guts, man.
home of cricket is Wankhede. Come on, we all know that.
Exactly.
No, and also it is so much more natural to do it, when it is sweltering and sweaty at 35 degrees, after you. Yeah.
Fair point.
Yeah.
No, that's true actually. See, because apparently Ganguly wanted the whole team to do it on the Lord's balcony, and can you imagine that sight? So and then better sort of sense prevailed, and people were like, no, we not we all like are uncomfortable and all that. So it ended up being just him. But yeah, with Flintoff, see, he gets the final wicket, and then he runs around, and here's like, he's obviously channeling the football sort of celebration, and he's doing that. There was a spontaneity to it. I mean, it wasn't. It was perhaps, I would think it's not pre-planned.
So also because we're talking about this one-day series, no, and since we've spoken about Trescothick and how annoying he was then, one of the most interesting passages in his book where he talks about batting, actually. He specifically talks about the knock that he plays, I think, in the first game in this series where he gets 100. And it's very interesting because he talks about it in a way that even, non-professional cricketers, amateurs, fans can understand. He talks about how when he's batting well, he's picking up the bowler's cues so early that it actually feels like the ball is coming to him in slow motion. He describes it in terms of the bullets in the matrix, where he says it doesn't matter how fast he's bowling at it. When I'm in that kind of form, I'm basically picking up the ball so early that I have ages of time to get into position. And he specifically talks about this series. So, Ashoka, I think it's it's no wonder that we remember Trescothick bullying us throughout this series, because he describes it as some of his best batting, where he was
bullets in the matrix is correct only, man, because we were bowling at those speeds only.
Also, Trescothick was one of the batters who had a fantastic sweep shot. Like he was like, he would just like rip them like with the sweeps. He was not the kind of batter who would necessarily like just nudge the sweep or try to get it in the gap and all. Like, he had that proper ripping sweep that would just clang the boundary boards. And in Calcutta, I remember him playing quite a few of those sweeps.
Yeah, and to be fair, he was in good form also. I mean, he carried that form outside of this series also. This was just a great period of his batting. I mean, he actually, before Peterson, I think he was England's premier batsman, attacking batsman. Cook was a premier batsman, but nobody watched him bat. That's
he filled up the bars when he batted.
I think we've covered good ground on this one. Do you guys want to touch upon anything else that we might have missed about?
I mean, we sort of airbrushed Craig White in one line, but I think we should sort of give a bit of credit there, because number one, Craig White came in with huge hopes into the English team, like most all-rounders did back then, as being the next Botham. It only had, I mean, Flintoff was the one who eventually sort of lived up to that marking. But Craig White, I mean, to come to India and to not only the century that he made, which was good and sort of the attritional kind of innings, but even his bowling, there were times in which he was quick. You felt like this. He was reversing it, and in Bangalore, there was suddenly you had this Hogarth and Flintoff and Craig White, and in those conditions, felt like watching a game in England. I mean, might have even been compared to Headingley, in some phases. So yeah, Craig White, I think, was a crucial component for that series. But I think eventually, of course, his career petered out. But I mean, didn't really go too far in Test cricket. But yeah, he was good, man. He was good in that phase. Apart from Trescothick, the other opener, I mean, Mark Butcher was also quite good in this series. So he batted well, and remember quite a few good knocks from him. So
actually, the backstory there, Sidvi, is that apparently Butcher was sick basically throughout. He picked up a viral very early on the tour, and unfortunately, I think Graham Thorpe had to leave after one Test match. I think he was having marital issues, and his marriage was falling apart, so he had to leave the tour midway. So basically, Butcher, even though he was not fully fit, had to play because Nasser Hussain said, "I need experienced guys. I can't afford to lose too much experience in the batting order." So he played that series. He played quite well. And this was the handicap he was playing under. I mean, he was never fully fit. He was sick in all the games.
And lastly, one thing we must mention, though we take this for granted very often with respect to spinners in India. But see, I mean, Kumble had a fantastic series, as he usually did in India. But it was also like a period where he had missed the 2001 Australia series because of injury. And it was Harbhajan basically carrying the team throughout that series. So in a way, it was like also Kumble's first series after comeback at home, and for him to do what he did was a huge credit to him. I mean, we often think that a spinner in India, he obviously got wickets, but come on, I mean, it's not on those pitches, especially Mohali. England got a good start, and then Ahmedabad was like a really sort of attritional pitch. And to get all the wickets that he did in those conditions, and Bangalore, which was not actually favorable at all to spin. So given his performances there, I think that was huge. I mean, if you see, you will never think of England 2001 when you think of a highlight in Kumble's career, because he had so many great performances at home. But I think it was a fantastic series for him, and we should acknowledge that.
Yeah, and lots of first innings wickets also. I think he was the highest wicket taker. I think he took 18, 19 wickets. And 2 of his 5-wicket hauls were first innings 5-wicket hauls. So it's not even like the pitch was, that helpful.
And he bowled a lot of overs.
He bowled a lot of overs. Yeah.
And England were 200 for 3 or something in the first Test. That's they were going really well. I mean, they were looking at a 400 total.
Yeah.
But Kumble and Harbhajan bowled them out rapidly after that. So yeah, I think it was thanks to them that India ended up winning that series. Otherwise, the teams they were picking and the fast bowlers that they had, it might have been really hard.
Okay, I think we've covered good ground. So it was an interesting discussion about a very, very interesting series, and as we mentioned, a lot of it has got to do with the time in which it was played and with the way we were consuming cricket at that time, and the amount of time we had between one series and another, which allowed us to process all these things and keep talking about all these things. Nowadays, of course, we don't have the luxury of such context building time between series, which in some cases is good, which in some cases is bad. As I mentioned in the last episode, Test cricket gives you the canvas to kind of express your insecurities. Perhaps this is my insecurity that I don't have time in between series to sort of think over. So thanks a lot for joining us. We'll be covering the England Test series closely. We'll be doing test reviews and the series reviews as well. Looking forward to catch up with you on an episode soon. Thank you so much.
India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India are home.